Welcome back to another Boxscore Geeks show. Happy holiday weekend. In light of that, we actually have a fun one where we're going to talk the draft based on the leaked NBA proposal for fixing, I put that in quotes for those of you listening not watching the draft. Unlike previous shows, we're not going to have a criteria, itinerary. Arturo and I are both off for vacation. I do have to get going in a bit, but here's the good news. We don't have time limits. We don't have a schedule. We're just going to be talking the draft for as long as we feel like. With that in mind, Arturo, your first article at Wages of Wins, at least your first major one, you and Dave actually published to the Wall Street Journal about the history of the draft. Our first collaborative piece was actually on the draft. You have a draft model. I think it's safe to call you a draft expert.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't break down film, but I do spend an inordinate amount of time thinking about the draft, the logistics behind the draft, and the economics behind the draft. I'm fascinated by it.
I'm going to call you on the film comment too, Arturo. You have sent me film of draft prospects and said, "Can you believe this guy?" Like you sent me a Euro player and said, "Watch this dunk. Can you believe what he's doing?" So even the film comments a lie.
Well, I mean, it's one of those things I'm actually working on. At some point, I think I'll be able to, but I don't claim to be able to break down film as of yet. But I'm getting better. I can recognize horns when I actually see it. But we're getting off topic, comrade. We need to get back to the draft.
Oh, absolutely. So getting onto the draft, I actually wanted to break this down. We're going to be talking a lot about the proposed changes, a solution you had actually suggested. But when we were talking about this before the show, something that came up is actually the idea of who does the draft benefit? Because we're sold this story as fans that it's supposed to be about parity in the league, but we know that parity in the league is a myth, that Miami is probably going to be back in the finals next year, that the super teams rule the NBA, and that's always been the case. So why in the NBA is the draft in place, and who is it benefiting?
Well, it's in place not only in the NBA, but in all major sports in the U.S. because it was set up by the NFL owners way back when, and it was set up so that they could control the price and they could control the movement of players. So they established the draft so they can force players to go where they want them to go, and they can fix them at a lower wage. So in general, the draft is something that provides cheap labor for all these teams. And what I mean by that is you're paying much less for a player at a fixed price as opposed to having to compete against each other. It's in essence like it's like all the gas stations in your town getting together and saying they're going to charge you a certain price, right? Because and we're not going to compete with each other, so nobody's going to break this code. So it's the same thing. So you have to go to this team, and you have to accept the salary they're going to pay you. And I think everybody's collusive to this because the owners make minimize the risk they're putting into these new players, and also the players who are actually already in the union by having these guys come in at a lower rate mean they get a bigger share of the pie. So the players basically get, let's say, 50% of all the money in the NBA, and like the lower the rookie share, the higher it's going to be with the vets who are already running the union. So it's got the union reps, much like it happens sometimes in workplaces, or the guys who are benefiting from like lowering the salaries on rookies and having them make less money.
So by the way, tell me if I'm off base here, because I got into a discussion with a guy online about this point. So the NBA, basically their CBA says player salaries are a fixed percentage of income. Mm-hmm. So I was arguing that this was very exploitative to players, and he says, well, how can it be exploitative? Because if it's not going to rookies, it's going to other players. But what we've noticed in the last couple of lockouts is the NBA is basically able to force a lower percentage of revenue into the players because they've spread it around. So they've got all these veterans that aren't going to be stars, that aren't going to make max contracts, that say, look, if we argue for 53% instead of 47%, that doesn't really benefit us. In fact, I think you had done a piece at one point. Sorry, I didn't get this to you in time, Brian. You did a piece that basically said, here's how long they wait. If they wait this long, they eat any benefits they get by raising it 3% or whatever. So by doing this, by spreading the wealth around and basically paying off veterans, they reduce players' bargaining power in these collective bargaining agreements and basically are able to give a lower percentage of revenue because the power is distributed instead of given to the stars.
Yeah, what they do is they minimize the pain, and again, we're getting into the CBA and like the what happens when you have the collective bargaining. But in essence, what the owners do is the owners are basically making sure that the impact of the vets who are actually like the voting members of the union is minimized by screwing the rookies. That's what they do. I mean, they screw the draftees who are coming in, and they do that then that's how they do that. And I think, at the end of the day, it's an interesting dichotomy. We can get into that's a whole other discussion, but really, like, kind of what I think eventually has to happen is eventually the players kind of need to say, well, do we actually need the owners to actually do this? And because functionally, all the talent and all the skill and all the intellectual property is the players. Everything is around the players. The owners really, all they do is provide the venue, and those venues already exist. And sometimes a lot of these are public. So it's almost like, by fixing it at that point, by fixing it at 50% or whatever, I mean, is what the owners bring to the table worth 50% of the revenue? I don't think so. But this is a whole separate topic. I mean, again, what ends up happening is basically the rookies always end up holding a short of this thing. I think partly what fascinates me is being a child of Cuban immigrants and having gone through the whole communist thing. It's fascinating to me that the U.S. sports market is basically run like a communist system, whereas like if you go to Europe or anywhere else, everything's just complete free market, and people have freedom to move, they have freedom to transfer, and if you're signing up a 12-year-old for your Barcelona soccer academy, you're paying that 12-year-old. I mean, you're not like getting him for cheap. You're going to have to pay him money to actually come and play for your team.
Yeah, and this is where I'll get just kind of on my soapbox. I warned you about this. I mean, what has really bugged me, and I'll give Matty Iglesias over at Slate some props because he did release this. And I'll give Kevin Arnovitz, who wrote a piece, I guess, a little over a year ago. And man, Brian, I really dropped the ball. I sent you a bunch of links, and none of the ones I'm mentioning are the ones that are going to come up. But that said, Kevin Arnovitz wrote about.
You're on holiday.
Kevin Arnovitz wrote about abolishing the draft. Matty Iglesias wrote the same thing. Just why do we need this? This makes absolutely no sense. The one other place, and actually in the piece that Kevin Arnovitz wrote, he mentions the national match system of healthcare for residencies for future doctors. It turns out that's the only other system that's actually similar to the draft. They tried to make a lawsuit, and what actually happened is the hospitals went and lobbied Congress. Congress passed an exemption. So basically they admitted it was antitrust, but then had the law changed to make an exception for it. So
but basically every single major sport is operating under an antitrust exemption. So I mean, basically they copy what's being done in major sports in the U.S. It's like if we had the major and this is like the big stick that Congress has over all the major sports, and that's how they get them to change behavior. This is why we had the steroid hearings, people, because Congress basically can go to Major League Baseball and say, like, hey, you're going to give us a soapbox, or we're going to take away your antitrust exemption, and you're not going to like that.
Well, yeah, so exactly. That's the point, is that the draft makes no sense, and I get really sick and tired of, although we're going to talk about some of your possible changes, of people
I'm going to say
the draft, because I think it's the real answer is, why do we need the draft?
It's an argument about, like, if you're arguing economics, it's an argument about free markets versus monopoly. It makes perfect sense for the guy who owned the monopoly. I mean, it makes complete and utter sense for them to basically lock in the talent. So, like, they have the incentive. It just doesn't really make sense from a point of view of free market. And I think
even if we're talking monopoly, what I would argue there is, and this is what we see, the NBA does. That I actually understand that wanting to lock in cheap, awesome talent, like getting LeBron James at $5 million a year. I remember NBA 2K8, for those of you out there, is the best NBA 2K because you can get Chris Paul, LeBron James, and Dwight Howard, I think, for a combined salary of like $13 million, because they're all still on their rookie contracts in that game.
Yeah, I mean, I think the point I was going to make is, here's the thing: what would happen on the current CBA if you abolish the draft and you sign all the players coming in from college as free agents, right? So you could sign them in as free agents and bring them in. What would happen is you would end up, and dumb contracts would be across the board because that's the way the league operates. So what ends up happening is, like, the rookies get a larger share of the pie, and the veterans would, like, lose money, and a lot of the veterans would actually lose their chairs in the league. And also, the other thing that would happen, which is not convenient to the owners, is that there's a probability that you wouldn't sign 60 guys coming in from college to the contracts, which means if you don't sign the 60 guys coming in from college, that means everybody who's in the league is going to have a longer career. So you're going to have guys who go past the four-year deal and get into this, but the draft basically locks the careers of all the players to 6 years. So if you only had like signing 20 guys out of college and you gave them all these longer contracts, two things are happening. One, the veterans are getting less money, and two, there's a lot of guys who are going to like lose their jobs in the leagues who are veterans. And I think three, the other thing is there's guys who are going to have longer careers because they're not going to lose their jobs. And these guys who have longer careers under the CBA make more money than the rookies, right? So it's a whole kind of situation where like, but at the end of the day, here's the thing: the owners will end up paying the exact same amount of money they're paying now. So for the owners, it's completely indifferent. It's just, they also, the draft also provides the ability to sell hope. So, you can't sell hope if every single free agent wants to sign in LA or Miami.
Well, that is true, but I mean, it also, if we have the salary cap, that's going to reduce that anyway, right? There are going to be teams, Los Angeles, even if they had wanted to, even if we told them next year they could have if they hadn't done the silly stuff with Kobe, but the year before, last year, if we'd wanted them to go into this year's draft, and I was looking at this today, none of the top 5 players are really playing that hot.
I'm going to make this prediction right now, and this is the first time I've said it, and it just occurred to me, which is the salary cap is going to be in real trouble in the next CBA because a couple things are at play. One, the rising prices of the NBA teams and tax breaks means that you're going to get more owners like Prokhorov, more crazy oil tycoon Middle East types. The same guys who are buying Premier League teams are going to want to come in, and those guys are going to want to spend money. And the other thing is, like, there wasn't a really big block on the big market, so the big markets got hosed because we lost Dr. Jerry Buss, and Dolan is kind of a mess. But I kind of think the big markets are going to the big markets got hosed in the new CBA, and the Lakers lost their competitive advantage. They haven't realized that, but they lost their competitive. They can't go to that $100 million place they used to be able to go. That's gone. And I think there's going to be pushback from the large market teams to move in the other direction. Here's the interesting thing: the large market teams control a disproportionate share of the revenue. So if the Lakers are unhappy, and the Knicks are unhappy, and the Clippers are unhappy, and the Nets team is unhappy, and the Bulls are unhappy, and if those teams are unhappy of the way the CBA
I can't believe you left out the Celtics, your own Celtics.
Well, the Celtics are an interesting beast because the Celtics kind of know how to game the CBA. So the Celtics are going to basically make it work for them, and they're already making it work for them. So they're not going to be upset. And if it changes, they're going to be like Spurs. They're going to make it work. They're a smart organization. I think the Lakers gave away, and again, it was the whole thing with Jerry Buss, but they let the CBA be done in such a way that they gave away their advantage, right? Their advantage isn't there. They don't have the money to sign these players and these guys. And everyone wants to play for the Lakers, but the Lakers just aren't going to be able to sign these guys because of the way CBA is set up.
Dwight walked out the door, man. What happened is, I think you may be right. So I think with the Lakers, and sorry to go off on this tangent, we have written about them quite a bit. What happened with the Lakers is Kobe, in the short term, neutralized their attract big stars because Dwight didn't want to play with them. Remember, in 2008, KG snubbed them. Pau Gasol came to them, but that was only because, he was fighting his way to get out, and basically Jerry West threw him a life raft.
Drake, fear is the mind killer.
I don't understand.
Fear is the mind killer. They're afraid. They're afraid of change. They're afraid of life without Kobe.
Oh, yeah.
It was too big of a change for them to contemplate. And I think one is that, and the sunk cost fallacy. It's like we've committed so much to this guy. We got to go. And again, they needed to cut bait. They just needed to say one of the things they need to cut bait or say, look, we're going to sign you, but you're not worth $28 million, and nobody's going to pay you that. And I think they kind of maneuvered themselves into a corner, and they misinterpreted the fact that, like, oh, we're taking care of Kobe. Here's the problem: the way the CBA is set up, you cannot take care of all players, right? You always have to ask yourself, what would Bill Belichick do? Bill Belichick would cut his grandmother, right?
Or you could even, I mean, I guess Boston in general. I mean, and as you noted, the Boston coach is now an economist, and Boston seems to be going this way very well. They basically said, hey, Paul Pierce, hey, KG, hey, Doc Rivers, thank you so much for your time here. We know we can't do it again, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to give you a nice contract, and we're going to send you to another team.
You do realize that there's a good chance that both those guys will play for the Celtics again, right?
Paul Pierce and KG?
Yes.
I hope not.
There's a good chance they will get, or at least Pierce. I mean, if they'll come back as like role players, at like to basically close out. It's been talked about. Basically, they'll come in as vets for one last year off the bench just because they want to retire as Celtics. And I take Pierce coming off the bench. I think he's a guy who could actually do that. KG playing like 10 minutes a night on a vet min would be great. I think the crowd would love him, and we give basically a farewell to. It's been talked about. So basically, we basically.
But back to the draft. Sorry, I'm actually going to push us back on track. So we're talking about big markets, and what would happen if we just let players loose and you have this weird thing. And you're saying actually what's interesting is this may already be happening without the change to the draft. With the infusion of people with lots of money that just want to win. A fantastic read was Soccernomics, which actually talks about the economics of soccer. And what they mentioned is you can't really make a business profitable without doing the tax break stuff, which you've already mentioned, because these are rich people that want to win, that are willing to spend lots of money. Prokhorov doesn't need to make money on the Nets. He wants to win.
You know who? This is interesting. I'm gonna basically put my finger in one of you in a wound for you. You know who the most successful like sports businessman in the world is probably?
Oh, I'm aware. It's Kroenke. We've talked about this before.
We've talked about this before. And again, the thing is, and as an Arsenal fan, I mean, you suffered, but look, we've been a selling club for like 10 years. And we had the Invincibles. We won the title. We had one of the greatest teams ever. And we sold Henry to Barcelona. And we sold Vieira to Juventus. And we basically sold we've sold guys. I mean, we've got Fabregas who's like starting now for Barcelona, who was like one of the best players in the world. And we just keep selling these guys. And the reason they did it was basically they were changing the cost structure on that team so that they would get to a point where they could make money hand over fist. And now they're going into separate mode. But it's all about it's like spending money to make money, or like taking cuts to actually set up the structure. So if you look at something like the Nets, like, you know, it's ridiculous how much money they're spending, but Prokhorov is kind of looking at it and saying, like, look, if I get this right, I'm turning the Nets into a $2 billion franchise in 5 to 10 years, right? So all these guys are going to come in and spend this crazy money. And I think it's going to continue happening because the peculiarity, and I'm not going to get into the RDA, but the peculiarity of the U.S. sports market is, one, you've got the fact that it's a monopoly that's protected under antitrust. You've got the draft where you lock in cheap talent. You've got the fact that you've got the roster depreciation allowance, which basically makes you able to just exploit the system and just raise the price of your franchise ridiculously.
We've talked about this on previous podcasts, but just real quick, could you say what that is again for people who
basically the roster depreciation allowance means that if I buy a team right now, I can depreciate the full price of the franchise over 15 years. And what that means is if my franchise is worth $1 billion, I can take $1 billion in government-approved tax breaks over the next 15 years at whatever rate I want. So if I want to take $200 million in tax break this year, I can. I just has to add up to that $1 billion over the 15 years. And if you're somebody like, say, James Dolan, who owns both the team and the network and the stadium, if you're creative with your books and you take the team as a loss leader, move all your profits somewhere else, you can basically turn the Knicks into a gigantic tax shelter. And I think there's a couple teams that actually run like that. The Magic are interesting in that. And there's all sorts of games you can play. And so if you're an oil sheik from the Middle East and you got all this money you need to basically move into tax shelters or like move around, or if you're a kind of, let's call him a shady businessman from Eastern Europe who has all this ill-gotten gains that you need to wash into a clean format, professional sports are a fantastic way to do it. And actually, if you read, there's some of the interesting stuff in soccer is this is how the game is played. So you're going to get all these big money guys coming in, and they're going to want to spend their money because part of that is I want to spend the money because I'm putting the money in one pocket while taking out of another. So really, all this stuff is really kind of fiscal manipulation. But this could be a whole topic. We're gonna get to the back.
Yeah, right? we're actually gonna have to talk this, and this may actually be what ends up getting you. I'm curious at Sloan. There are a few owners here. You need to save the Kings. I can't handle a bad Vivek in charge of a sports team. But anyway, back to that, let's get back to the draft. So we've talked about who it benefits. We've talked about the impacts of it ending, and so there's a very clear reason for both the owners of the team not to want to give the players more power, more money. There's a very clear incentive from the existing players in the league not to want to give them. And so the last question I'd had, and this leads us on to this leak document, which basically says, a fix the NBA is looking at is basically in about 10 years when all of the current draft picks and trades expire. They're looking at essentially giving every team a ring. So hopefully, Brian, if you see the Grantland article, there's a good diagram. They did a fantastic job visually explaining this. You give each team a ring that basically says, here's your order of draft picks for the next 30 years. You'll get a number one pick. Congratulations. But now there's no more tanking. There's no more trying to game the system. There's no more protected lottery picks. It basically says, here's how you're going to draft for the next 30 years.
See, I think it goes away to taking away the incentive to tank, which is what they're trying to do. They're trying to take away the incentive for teams to try not to win, right? So the way the system is set up now, there are certain periods of time where you'll have teams that suspiciously, and I'll quote this. I was talking to one of our mutual friends, Mosey Platt. We were talking. He was asking me. I think it was an Orlando Heat game, and he was asking me, "Hey, Vucevic didn't play. Why didn't he play?" And I said, "Oh, it was a DNP tanking." Right, so it's like, no, he felt weird, so he had like some sort of stomach thing, and they just said, no, sit down, don't worry about it. And the whole joke about like Michael Carter Williams like getting his knee poked with a rusty nail by Sixers management, and again, it's funny, but it's not. I think there's the other running joke, which is an analysis I need to do there. I think there's a chance this could be the season with the most 30-point blowouts ever in the history of the NBA, because there's just nights where people aren't trying. So you could just have nights of terrible basketball on television. And if you're a league that makes its living from selling live sporting events, you really don't want a situation where, like, there's a shot that 25% of your product is going to suck. Look at the slate of games for Christmas Day, right? So you've got the Lakers are on Christmas Day. That's not a good team. That's not going to be a game. You got the Knicks. I mean, their teams are like just not good, and it's because of the way it's set up. There are teams that actually might not even be trying on that day. So again, they've done a good job at trying to fix it by taking away the incentive. So by saying, look, there's not going to be any reward from not being any good in the draft. You're going to have a fixed pick. I think it does some of the work. I like it a little bit. But I have my suggestion as to what I'd like to do, and again, I think that gets us into, look, I'd be more in favor of doing it the same year, but basically using that as a wheel to kind of give out your what I called about the draft credits. So
okay, so I'm actually going to take us back a second before we hop on there. So the last question I'd had before we got started is just, I agree that this is almost needed because the NBA did lots of work on the draft to make it not advantageous to tank. We've looked at this, and I mean, I'm sorry, ESPN. This ESPN just drives me crazy because it's very clear that they go for things that strike people emotionally without using a lot of logic. Zach Lowe over at Grantland does this a lot too, where basically when they changed it to a draft lottery in the 90s, you eliminated any edge in tanking. It just stopped being worth it. Well, Devin Dignam has done. Now again,
here's the other terrible thing about this, and I was arguing. I was telling this to I think it was Matty Iglesias or somebody. I was telling this. I was saying, look, here's the thing. So basically, you're giving out. So these teams are going to win the lottery, right? In general, the way the system is set up, the teams that are winning the lottery have a demonstrated track record of being terrible at identifying talent, right? So you're terrible, you suck, you can't find good players. And now you're going to get a high draft pick, and that's going to solve the problem. So really, the system is actually kind of set up to, like, it's not going to help you. In general, as I said, unless a team gets severely lucky, or you have one of these things where a team kind of gets a pick they shouldn't, or like they trade for something. In general, these teams have a good shot of missing, partly because they're terrible, right? Yeah, so it's like why would you give? So you think Michael Jordan knows what to do with a number one pick? He doesn't know what to do with a number one pick.
Well, exactly. Kawhi Leonard. I mean, I talked to a guy that had been working with the Nuggets about Kenneth Faried.
It's Cowie, by the way, but keep going.
What?
It's Cowie, by the way, but keep going.
I thought it was Kawhi. But anyway. Are you sure?
Cowie Leonard, yeah.
Brian, I was going to say, they have the pronunciations at basketballreference.com. You can even pull it up. But I'm curious how to say. I think it's Kawhi. Arturo's saying it's Cowie, and the other pronunciation. So if you bring it up, tell me in the chat.
Cowie Leonard, yeah, Cowie Leonard.
So it's Cowie Leonard?
I think.
I was going to say, is it? I was going to say.
Let's keep going.
I think this is important, and I think we need to get this resolved, Arturo, because we cannot answer the draft. But anyway, so Leonard, basically, if we look at the draft, right, Leonard and Faried, two best picks in that draft, in my opinion. And it's, at the time, I question if the Nuggets are still there, but, the Nuggets were just frothing at the mouth for Farid. When he falls to 21 or 22, that, oh my God, they pull him. And the same thing, the Spurs see that Leonard's still available after the draft lottery, right? Because he's at the 15th pick, and boom, they trade for him. These savvy teams know what to do with their picks. So it's Kawhi. Yeah, you're right. All right. Apologies, Kawhi Leonard. I've been missaying your name for a lot. If you watch the podcast,
remember, trust the guy who's multilingual.
All right, agreed. But so that's what the point is. If we look at some of the best draft picks, they're from savvy teams. Manu Ginobili goes, 59th. He's the very last pick in the draft that year.
See, and this is why the argument I was making was I like the system in terms of spreading wealth and limiting the incentive for tanking, right? So, and I would go further, and actually I would take it so that you get a certain set amount of draft credits. With obviously the team who's number one gets the most draft credits. And when I say draft credits, anybody who's played with in fantasy league, in an auction league, basically knows what I'm talking about. Basically, what I'm saying is these draft credits are going to go to your draft budget. And every year you can use as much or as little of your draft budget as you want. You get to pick 2 players every year. You take that draft budget and you use that to draft your players. And actually, what I recommended, it was actually making it so that it's a live auction draft on TV. Now, I was arguing back and forth with myself whether I would want it to be something where it's is it an auction where you don't, a blind auction or an open auction? Because it would be fascinating to watch something like this. Because imagine so if you're a dumb team and you're saying, look,
it'd be fun, Arturo. Make it the best of both worlds. The teams bidding, they can't, it's like
everybody on TV.
It's like eBay.
It's a blind auction for the teams who are there, but everybody on TV can see what the hell they're.
So there's a whole camera. There's a whole camera.
Yep.
It's like poker. That's brilliant.
Exactly. It would be, and see, here's the interesting thing. So but would it be more interesting to have that, or you could have San Antonio playing with everybody's mind, but just raising the price by doing the dumb, which is what I do and these guys know what I'm talking about. Where I'll start bidding up the prices against everybody, just make sure you're not getting that guy for $40.
You got so lucky not to end up with Al Jefferson this year because you tried that BS and nobody blinked, and then I think Mosey's brother let you off the hook. You even said "oh crap" in the chat room.
I was like, oh yeah, well, I mean, but that's the risk you have to take. And I think the other one would be interesting is if you have an open auction, you can have the other teams oh, what the hell is San Antonio doing? Oh, why are they interested? All of a sudden the room is quiet and San Antonio puts in a 40 bid for Kawhi, and it was what the hell? And then you can get into a bidding war, or they could put in a weird bid on somebody to just manipulate the room. So I think it would actually be more interesting. I think the other thing is, I'm actually of the opinion that if you did it that way, and then you say, look, if there's a sucky draft, then nobody bids. It's so if there's a sucky draft, and everybody says whatever, we'll just put in a minimum bid and get mid-level guys. And I think if you could manage in such a way so that the salary is spread out, so that the bid price kind of reflects what the salaries are going to be paid out, and then you have to spend a certain amount of money over such years, it would be more interesting. And again, it would provide the other option is it would make the trades a lot more interesting, because instead of trading picks, you'd be trading draft credits. So you'd be trading so I'm going to send you so the trade's going to be Kyle Lowry for Iman Shumpert and Ray Felton, and 50% of all the draft credit that I have, James Dolan has left over.
And I think in your original suggestion, did you also mention that basically salary was tied to the number of credits? So if I bid 100 credits for Arturo Galletti to come play for the Denver Nuggets, that translates to $5 million or whatever.
Yeah. So basically, you could set it against what the so you could say, look, the year you get the one, right? So the year you get the one, you get 30 credits, right? So in the year you get 30, you get 1 credit. So let's say, I'm keeping it very simple. So if I get the 30 credits, that means, and again, people suggested making it a staggered system, but I'm making it simple right now. I'm aware that I should probably have the 1 pick be worth 100 credits, but forget about it. So let's say let's say 1 pick is 100 credits, and if you bid 100 credits, you have to pay the guy the salary of a number 1 pick. Now here's the interesting part. If I pay you 200 credits, then basically I have to pay you the salary of 2 number 1 picks. So I have to give you
what they could do to keep this exploitative is, they could make some cap or whatever, or do the same thing like the salary cap, right? Like after 100 credits, right? At 100 credits, they get the max. If it goes above 100 credits, it staggers down. There's plenty of ways to keep exploitation creative in this. But I would say that this kind of falls much closer to the national match system, where you basically say a player and a team can kind of meet, and the edge really does go to the team, but it's still a little more fair for the player.
Well, I mean, I like to have it open just because it would be interesting because I think it also kind of, and then you have to have some sort of penalty for that. I think where I would actually, and I'm going to take this somewhere really strange now, which is, I think that solves part of the problem. It provides the incentive and it rewards smart teams, and it makes honestly, a live auction draft featuring NBA GMs would probably must-watch television. I mean, it would just be just have it in New York. And just think about the possibility of James Dolan in an auction draft with Sterling.
So I'm gonna do some market research real quick. I'm gonna throw this out to Brian. So Brian, you're watching this, you're listening to this. We didn't talk about this pre-show. You sold this to sound exciting, or does Arturo just sound like the ranting madmen? The same people that created fantasy sports in the beginning. But anyway, so Arturo, you were saying must-watch TV. You're debating whether or not it should be open or closed, if the owners can see each other going. I actually want to throw this out there, a link that I sent to Brian. This kind of system was actually floated on ESPN by a guy named Arun. And when I actually want to throw this out there, I told you I was going to do this at the beginning. It actually has bugged me for a while. You were very cordial on Twitter about it. I think you pinged him and just said, hey, no hat tip. But we met Arun at Sloan, and you sat down with them. You did the classic Arturo. You pulled out your laptop, because that's what when we get in an argument, you pull out the laptop. You pulled out the laptop. You set up this idea. You told it to him. And then a few months later, he's writing it for ESPN without so much as even giving a hat tip or a nod.
I mean, I think it was an interesting and weird night because we were sitting at a table, and I think there was 4 or 5 GMs sitting behind us in one table and with their families, and then there were 3 or 4 well-known gamblers sitting at the other table next to him. They were interacting, and then we went over and we were talking to all the sports guys. So I mean, I'm fine. I mean, I'm fine as long as something gets done and something that I have no problem with how the idea kind of percolates. So this is why I was whatever, he published it. I should have published it beforehand, but whatever, that's not a big deal to me.
Yeah.
As long as it gets
that's very high road of you. That's this is kind of like the Phil Jackson thing, if you recall. Phil Jackson in his books had mentioned that he would get in fights for his players so that they wouldn't get in trouble, they wouldn't get technical. Sometimes it's the job of the coach to get the technical foul to keep his team on their head, on game. And so I'm doing that here. I'm taking the technical, and I'm saying this is unacceptable. You can keep the high ground. You can keep in the game. You can keep from fouling out. I'm just saying that was BS.
Yeah, I mean, that's fine. I mean, I should have written it down. I ended up writing it down immediately after I saw the piece, but I should have written it down. That's what I did. And I think the other thing I was going to say, this is another idea, and I'm going to put it on the podcast because as long as before somebody else steals it. And this is one thing that's been talked about, which is splitting the league, basically having 2 tiers. So if you want to resolve tanking, we've got that. And the thing on this one is you have a top division and a bottom division. And basically all the playoff teams from last year in the top division, all the non-playoff teams are in the bottom. And the bottom 4 from that playoff division at the end of the season get to play the top 4 from the bottom, and they for the last playoff spots, and then you go for the playoffs. And the guys that are top are the guys who get the national games. That's one suggestion. I think the other one, and that's one suggestion to make it a little more competitive. I think the other one that I had was having any teams that make the playoffs that have a worse record than a team in the other conference have to play a 3-game series the week after the regular season is over for that playoff spot.
Wow,
one
thing I don't know if you recall, I did a video a while back on the NBA draft, or not the draft, the dunk contest, and I basically said it's kind of outlived its usefulness. It's kind of a sign of the times, and it doesn't really make sense anymore. But the kind of East versus West thing, even the All-Star game is kind of iffy. They run up the scores, they don't play D. It doesn't matter. You don't want to do what Major League Baseball does and make it matter in a stupid way. But an East versus West, where you've got teams fighting each other for playoff spots, that would be fun.
Well, I think I had it in the in one of the last. I'm going to look at what the teams would be right now based on the standings. So what I'm basically saying, so if we did this year, right, and we went and looked at it, it would end up being with. I'm looking for this right now. The rankings. Keep talking while I look this up.
I was going to say, Brian, I'm actually going to call you out, Brian. I asked you if you were excited about Arturo's idea, and you didn't say anything on that. You did send the authors of the paper are Arun Sen and Timothy Bond. That's an awesome name, Timothy Bond. But yeah, I'm still calling it out.
Basically, what I'm saying
is, see if they say anything.
So
yeah,
we have eight teams right in the West who make the playoffs through Dallas. Dallas, and like my last prediction, Dallas was like the 8th team, and the Golden State Warriors, the Phoenix Suns, the Pelicans, and the Lakers all have better records than playoff teams in the East. So you would have
the Lakers have a better record than a playoff team. Don't they still have a losing record?
They would be projected better than the playoff team in the East. Of course.
I know this,
so basically,
but it's so weird to hear this. How bad?
So we have like going by. So we've got 4 teams in the West. So we'd have the 9th team, which is Golden State, playing the. Let's see, they would be playing the 8th team. They would play. You'd have the Lakers. Sorry, no, the Golden State Warriors playing the Pistons. You'd have the Phoenix Suns playing the Bobcats. You'd have the Pelicans playing the Raptors, and the Lakers playing the Wizards in a 3-game series over the week. And the teams actually, to give it some advantage, basically the teams who have the seed get 2 games at home. So you basically play 1 game in. So if it's the Lakers and Wizards, you play 1 game in LA and then 2 games in Washington. And the team that wins 3 games,
Arturo, we're going to Sloan this year, and I've been trying to think of T-shirt designs. If you guys have them. What we did last year is we came up with a fantastic T-shirt design courtesy of Jeremy Britton, and I went and got photographed with a bunch of famous people with it. It was such a perfect design because it said the average win in the NBA is 1.5 million. The average NBA GM doesn't realize that, which is awesome.
I got photographed. There was one shirt I got photographed with the Spurs GM on it, and actually I was about to tweet that picture at the end of Game 6. I literally had the tweet written with me and the Spurs owner with that shirt. And I was wearing that shirt while I was watching the Game 6. So I had it on. I was ready to tweet it when they won, but
it happened. But I was going to say, thinking of shirt ideas, but for next year. But I'm thinking one of our shirt designs, because Sloan is multi-day, and I think the day we fly in, I also want to get one. Might be Arturo for NBA commissioner, because this excites me. While I think the draft is stupid, I accept that the owners, the veterans.
I would take deputy commissioner.
That can't go on a T-shirt.
Shadow commissioner. How about shadow NBA commissioner? I like shadow NBA commissioner.
I'm just saying, I think the design of possibly one of the political signs or whatever, and just say Arturo for commissioner might be a fun shirt. Anyway. Because like I said, I hate the draft. I think it's a dumb idea, but I also accept that there is so much politics in keeping it around that getting rid of it just would involve the NBA Players Association agreeing they won't agree to that because the veterans make money. The owners agreeing to that, they won't agree to it, keeps costs low. The NCAA obviously won't agree to it because they get a free, multi-million-dollar business out of it. So unfortunately, it's not going anywhere soon.
I think the trick is to make it so that if you do it by credits, you have to fix the credits to so basically you need to make the share of the NBA salary that the players get, like the rookies on the rookie contracts, get fixed. If you make that fixed, say, look, they get 10%, like those guys get 25 or 25% of the total player share, and the vets get like 75%, which is kind of really unfair because of the first 4 years, but fine. You fix it to whatever number it is, and then tie it in like that. The owners won't care. As long as what's going to happen is there's ways for you to set it up so they don't care. But again, I think the point being that you can make for a better product. So as long as you make the league more competitive, and you make it so that there's no incentive to tank, and you make it so that you have more fair comparisons and you have better quality television, I think that's what you want. And I think that's, at the end of the day, whatever the NBA is doing, whatever they have to do, if I'm running the NBA, right, I need to make sure that I'm making my product more compelling, right? So if you watch the NFL, right, this season's been the perfect examples. All the gamblers, all the the pundits have been taking a bath picking games because like you don't know who the hell's going to win with league. Jacksonville at one point was like one of the most terrible teams ever measured, and they've been winning games.
So Arturo, I'm going to stop you there. I'm a Denver fan, so I know who's going to win.
Not Denver. It's going to get cold pretty soon. Like,
didn't he set a freaking he set a freaking record in the cold?
Isn't Von Miller out? I thought Von Miller was out. It's like I've seen this picture before. I mean, it's like Peyton having this wonderful regular season and having all these offensive records and then crapping the bed in the first or second round of the playoffs. I've seen this picture before.
I need to look this up again, but I was looking it over. Like, Peyton Manning's not bad in the playoffs. He's lost games that he's supposed to lose. So anyway, sorry, we got off track.
Do you remember? Are you aware how he won the Super Bowl? Basically, I think it was Deion, the pass to Deion Branch dropping a ball in the AFC Championship game, and then who was the opponent? Who was the quarterback he was playing against? Was it Sexy Rexy? It was I would say Rex Grossman was probably the worst quarterback ever to actually start a Super Bowl.
I wrote a giant article criticizing Bill Simmons where I basically said, look, playoffs are random. You can't take somebody's championship away from them. So you can nitpick all you want. All I can say is, Peyton Manning, he's had huge expectations, but he's never had the expectations of a perfect season and then given it away at the last second. That's, he hadn't done that yet.
There was some help there. I'm going to say there was some help there. That play should have been blown dead, but I'm not going to get into this one actually. But yeah, that play should have been blown dead. And again, Randy Moss, it went off his fingertips. Would have been the greatest play. Would have been the greatest play in Super Bowl history. But what can you do?
All right. Actually, I'm quite content with where we've ended up. I've only got a few minutes left. So really, I've really liked how we've gone over the draft, why it's in place, what the new system means, what a much better system is, and not only that, a few ideas to how to just improve the league in general. Is there anything you want to end up on the draft or anything else before we all go off to a happy holiday weekend?
Yeah, well, I mean, hopefully I can get a couple post-ups before the holidays so we can actually play with them. But I think on the draft, I think, as I said, at the end of the day, I mean, I understand why it exists from the owner's point of view, and it's going to be hard to eliminate that kind of system. But I think what they can do and what they should do is look for ways to, again, you don't want to incentivize losing, right? So you need to keep your product competitive because, I'm a lead pass customer, and I hate it when I'm going in and going wow, those are 10 crappy games I'm going to have to watch tonight, or at least one of them. And I think that we're heading down a path where there's going to be days later on in the season, particularly after the All-Star break, that it's going to be just that it's going to be unwatchable basketball, and that's not something you want. I mean, I think the league is poised to be, and I think there's an argument to be made that the NBA may be the number one sport in America at some point in the next 30 or 40 years, because of the fact that the NFL has real structural and problems threatening their existence. And I say this as a boxing fan and from a boxing family, and things that are happening in football are like that. Major League Baseball is an old man's game, and hockey is kind of a regional game. So basketball is poised. But
I was going to say on that note, if we look at what you were saying, football, some of the notes in League of Denial were just a slight dip in players playing football. If those players switch to playing basketball instead, the talent infusion you now get in the NBA, because there are players in the NFL that are 6'5", huge, can run really fast and jump.
If I were
NBA,
if I were running let's say I'm running an English soccer football team, I would be setting up soccer academies in California. I would be setting up soccer academies in Texas. I would be setting up soccer academies in inner city Miami, which are if anybody knows about football, these are the hotbeds for talent. You get to those places because all these 6'5", 6'7" guys were playing wide receiver in the NFL. Those kids, a lot of those kids, if you give them the option, they're not going to be playing. They might be playing football. And I mean, I think here's the thing: it's some of these guys are they're bigger and stronger and faster than anything you currently have playing world football. I mean, you don't see a guy like Megatron, like Calvin Johnson. You don't see anybody like Calvin Johnson playing soccer at the highest level. So I mean, to your point, the talent is going to move, and when talent moves, is going to make for a worse product. So again, the NBA is poised, but they need to make sure, they need to protect the shield and make sure that the games that we're watching on TV are competitive, right? There's nothing worse than non-competitive games. The biggest scandals the NBA had in its formation were things having to do with point shaving. You don't want to go into you do not want to have the insinuation that a team is not playing to win the games. This is and I know teams do it, but this is not what you want to have happen.
So, by the way, one last question before we tag out, because you've mentioned the Mad Russian a few times. Do you think the possibility of infusion of people like Europeans, such as the Russian, and also Kroenke, who has soccer background, may actually shift the culture of the league to be more similar to Europe?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think what's going to happen is that these teams are going to want to spend money, and these teams are going to want to make money. And I think a couple of things that I think are going to happen is I think you're going to have, so basically what the Nets did, if you look at it, the Nets, Prokhorov went and said that he couldn't get the Knicks, so he said, fine, I can't get the New York team, I'm going to make a New York team. He went, he got the Brooklyn Nets for a song, and he moved them to the largest market in the country. And I think this is something that's going to happen in the future. Don't be surprised somebody comes in, swoops in, and buys something like a second tier or a small market team and moves them to the large market. Moves them to some crazy Russian comes in, or a crazy Arab chick comes in, buys a Pacer, and moves them to Gary, Indiana, and calls them the Chicago Pacers, or moves them to South Chicago. And because you're going to look for guys who are going to want to turn these into global brands and global products, right? And I think that's kind of where it's going to move. I mean, there's too much money not to be made. I think NBA franchises, what was the latest value? Something like 700 million was the highest one, 700, 800?
And there are lots of, with what you're saying, there are lots of NBA franchises. I mean, you did the work that's still getting linked on this at Wages of Wins about markets that can't sustain a team. Indiana, New Orleans, Charlotte, Utah. These places should not have teams, and if their ownership ever decides to move on it, those seem poised to be moved.
Yeah, I think the other thing that the league hasn't done and they should do, which is if they really want to protect the small market teams, they need to get more teams in place. I think at this point we're overdue for a 2 to 4 team expansion, and basically put in more players, put in more games, and put these teams in the large markets, like another Chicago team, maybe another LA team, or something. Was it the Empire, City of Empire as well? There are markets where they could actually put players in. I think that's how you protect the small market teams, because there's just going to be too much money. I mean, there are going to be billionaires begging the league to say, here's $1 billion, give me a team, right? And I think it's going to be
that's
really
already
hard
happened.
to yeah.
The Kings, right? The Kings, the Warriors, the Nets, these are bad teams that are selling for record high prices.
Yeah, this is kind of a recent artifice that it's happened in the last 40 years, which is kind of weird. Back in the day, teams used to move, right? If it didn't work in a city, they would close shop and move. And for whatever reason, now there's this perception that there's an obligation to keep a team in a city and protect them. The league has no. It's if I'm running a McDonald's, I have no obligation to keep the McDonald's open in a crappy neighborhood that's not making any money, right? So
by the way, this was my fantastic Christmas gift. I finished Dr. J's autobiography. He retweeted me when I tweeted at him to thank him, and he retweeted me and just made my day. So Dr. J, class act, thank you so much. But reading about the ABA and the turbulent 70s and the NBA and ABA, just what you're saying, where basically every year the ABA, 1 or 2 teams would just fold and show up someplace new. So it's exactly what you're saying.
You read Loose Balls, right?
Oh, I mean, that's the thing. If you're talking history of the ABA, Dr. J's book, Loose Balls is fantastic because it's this huge overview, and you talks each year and talks teams and all these weird stories. Dr. J, though, he's talking living it. He's talking, signing with the Atlanta Hawks, while being drafted by the Bucks, while still being owned by the Squires. It's a firsthand account of a lot of that, as well as his personal life is quite fascinating too. I did not realize just how much he went through. I didn't realize that he went bankrupt trying to finance a golf course with some shady people that he trusted. Fantastic stuff. So holiday gift, you still got a day. This will go up the 24th. This will go up Christmas Eve. If you're looking for a gift for the basketball fan in your life, Dr. J's book, must read.
Yeah, and if they haven't read Terry Pluto, they're not really a basketball fan, but if they haven't, you can also give them the Terry Pluto book, Loose Balls. That's another great basketball book if you want to talk about the ABA. But I think, again,
if you give those together, that's fantastic. And, those things, I've read them both. And also for the advanced stats fan, Dr. J, by the way, Brian told us we're going over time. I said a cutoff of 9:45. Arturo, sorry, you've been way too fascinating, so I'm okay going over. But Dr. J is talking about shooting efficiency, talking about when he's talking about his early life. By the way, I consider the draft done. I think we've nailed it. I enjoyed it. I think it's just a nice wrap up. But Dr. J is talking about when he was getting into basketball, the thing he focused on hugely was rebounding, because he realized if he was valuable as a rebounder, he'd get easy shots and teams would need him. So that was fascinating to me, just how much focus he put on it.
This is a lost kind of art. If you look at there's some great film on YouTube about like Red Auerbach talking about the principles of the game, and I forget is it Red Holzman, who was the coach of the Knicks, who's the guy who taught. I think Riley went through a system, and Phil went through a system as well, and he was the same way, like rebounding and fundamentals and de-emphasizing scoring. And it's interesting that a lot of those, like, that if you look at some of those coaching kind of trees, and a lot of those guys were extremely successful. So de-emphasizing is like the anti-Knicks, which is weird to say because it's the Knicks coaching tree, which has been so successful, and the Knicks are like the exact opposite of that coaching tree. It's really kind of just the strangest thing ever. Really, the most it is the most successful coaching tree if you start adding up titles, because you've got Riles and Spo and Phil and Red, and you count up the titles. It's great. It's like that's the style of basketball, the Knicks style of basketball from the 70s, and the same thing that Red Auerbach used to do. I think so. It's kind of the anti-Knicks style, which is
that is fun. And that was actually another fun thing about Dr. J's book was in the 70s, the Knicks and the Nets ruled basketball. From 1970 to 1980. New York was the place of basketball, and then it's amazing what happened since then.
And again, it's kind of they should. I mean, it's about like kind of the market, and they have an advantage. It's just a matter of like kind of when you value the wrong things and when you do the wrong things, that's leads to bad results. And I think this is the arguments like it's like have advanced stats come to basketball. You can still find an idiot to make a trade with. And I mean, I don't mean to be mean to any TMs out there that like need a stats help, but somebody's got to speak the truth. It's like a lot of teams just don't make smart decisions, right? And we have ample proof of that every day. There's a sucker born every minute.
Yeah, I was gonna say. By the way, one last just stat to end on. Do you know when the Knicks made their last title appearance? What year that was?
Last NBA Finals appearance?
Yeah, last Finals appearance.
Yeah, like 1999, being coached by Jeff Van Gundy.
Yeah. Do you know when James Dolan got a majority share ownership of the Knicks?
The next year.
1999. Yep. That was beautiful.
And he got rid of Jeff. He basically kind of got rid of him and put a stain out. Whereas I don't know, it's whereas Mike Woodson could basically show up. Basically, Mike Woodson could show up like in a clown suit and smoking and punch Spike Lee in the face and probably didn't get fired. It's the strangest thing in the world.
I was going to say I love those Knicks those Knicks teams because they traded Marcus Camby and Nene for Antonio McDyess. It was great. I'm going to say this. I'm going to say this to like anybody who watches this and who follows me is like, and I've linked a lot of these guys. Anybody who isn't reading like things like Knicks Blogger and like all the fantastic recaps the Knicks fans are doing. It's like literally, I mean to like kind of say this. It's like some of these recaps should, like they should be made into a book. It is some of the best writing I've seen. I mean, obviously it's being driven by a certain angst level, but the writing is so good. I mean, it's just like it is just Knicks Twitter and Knicks blogging. It has been fantastic, and I mean this like sincerely. Some of the best writing, some of the best sports writing I've seen in a while. It's just really fun to read. Oh, I definitely, yeah. The Knicks don't deserve their fans is one of the things I've kind of noticed. But That's the way it goes. All right. Well, we've clearly gone off topic. We're about to hit an hour, so that's good. So I'm just going to say Merry Christmas to everybody. Do you want to sign off too as well, Arturo?
Feliz Navidad, próspero año y felicidad.
Excellent.